Well, hello again, friends. I want to offer another reflection on a Psalm of Lament. And this follows on from the thoughts I've shared recently on Psalm 13 and Psalm 6. It's a third and final reflection, for now at least, on the songs of complaint which we frequently find in the Psalms. And as I've said before, I think it's especially important we attend these Psalms right now because of the permission they give us to come to God with our darkest thoughts and in our hardest moments, and also because of the way they give an expression to what we feel in those moments, which we might not be able to articulate ourselves. I've also wanted to offer a couple of reflections because I felt it's important to stay in the moment of complaint, if that makes sense. I think there's a temptation sometimes to read a psalm like this and then just move on. But actually, the issues which are dealt with here are so important that they can't be glossed over. I think they require us to give them serious and prolonged attention. Now, if you're like me, I'm sure there are certain passages or texts which have been meaningful to you over a sustained period of time. And what I want to talk about today is one of those Psalms for me. Years ago, I remember listening to a beautiful version of this passage by the singer Adrian Snell, which I think is still an evocative and a very beautiful rendering. And I've kept that CD in a battered case, taken it with me around various house moves. I've kept returning to the album and to this passage over many years. And the text in question is Psalm 130. Let me read it to you now. Out of the depths, I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence serve you. I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. So here's a little question you might want to ponder. Where did this psalm come from? Most of our Bibles provide a little detail on the passage. They remind us right at the start that this is one of the songs of ascent, songs that were sung by pilgrims on their way to festivals in Jerusalem. But actually, I think there's another more basic and fundamental question to where this psalm comes from. It comes from the depths. Where are the depths? We're not told exactly, and yet most of us who've read this psalm, having chalked up any experience of life, will know we've been there at some stage. The depths are the places of desperation. The depths are where we've all been to at our lowest moments. The depths are where we go to when we're at rock bottom. Might not surprise us to know that this is the psalm which is inscribed on a memorial in the concentration camp at Dachau in southern Germany. This is a psalm which reminds us of how in the depths, in the places which are so hellish and terrible that people may even speak of them as God forsaken, still God hears. The psalmist prays, Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. And we are not left in doubt that the prayer will be heard. Maybe this is a message we need to take more than any other from this psalm, that God hears the prayers we offer from the depths, that in the midst of all that is going on at the moment, God hears the cries from the care homes and intensive care units. God hears the cries of those wondering if their business will survive the lockdown. God hears the cries of the self-isolating and the lonely. God hears the cries of the bereaved. It's a prayer for now. And it's a prayer for those who at any and all times find themselves in the depths. It's a reminder that God hears the cries from refugee camps and borders between countries. God hears the cries of the victims of violence. God hears the cries of those who are afflicted in their bodies or their minds. What is it that causes those who are so desperate to cry out to God in this way? I wonder if we find an answer to that question in verses 3 and 4, where the psalmist talks about how God is one who will forgive. When I read this passage, I find my mind going back to a number of the stories which we find in the Gospels. You know how people come to Jesus and they're looking for healing, and that they're looking for help, they're looking for wholeness. But invariably, he gives them that healing, but he also speaks of how their sins are forgiven. It's as if he looks behind the suffering that they present with, and he knows they need something even more. And it seems to me there's that same sort of fundamental need being spoken of here. When you think about it, I mean, what is it that we need more than anything else from God? We need forgiveness. And we need it from him because, as the psalmist says, there's such a chasm between him and us, between our fallenness and his holiness. And actually, when you think about it, you could go on and say that the forgiveness is the fundamental baseline need that lies at the heart of all of our despair and our brokenness. If there is to be any possibility of hitting the reset button in our lives, of ever being able to salvage broken relationships, of ever being able to move on after disappointment or hurt has occurred, we need forgiveness. And our God is the God of forgiveness. That's why he is also the God of new beginnings. You know, let's face it, if we didn't have a hope of God ever forgiving us, how would any of us have a basis for any kind of hope at all? So the psalmist prays, gives all of this to God, and talks of how he waits for God, puts his hope in God. And there's this wonderful imagery he uses. Do you remember how in verse 6 he talks of how he waits more than watchmen wait for the morning? There is that beautifully evocative way in which he repeats the phrase for effect. I love this image because for me it speaks of a deep longing, and yet it speaks of something utterly reliable. Think about it. Did you ever find yourself up in the middle of the night hoping that the morning would come and find that it didn't? Of course not. But because the morning always comes. As sure as the night follows day, the day follows the night. If you wait and you hope and you long for God to show up and act, it'll come. It'll happen. The morning will come. And this is a confidence which the psalmist speaks of. And then there's this moment when there seems to be a shift, you know, from the personal to a wider statement of faith and encouragement. And it's given to the whole community of Israel to put their hope in God. And again, this happens so often in the Psalms. It's as if one person gives their testimony, and having done so, on the basis of who God has been to them, they can then say, look, he's come through for me. I can vouch for that. So you put your trust in him as well. Israel, put your trust in God. I love what the great Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann says about this psalm. He says this psalm is the miserable cry of a nobody from nowhere. And the cry penetrates the veil of heaven. It is heard and received. What a great summing up. So if, like me, you've had your share of occasions when When you feel like a nobody from nowhere yourself, read this and be hopeful. Read this and know that even if you're in the depths, God will listen. Just a final thought. Over the last couple of weeks, in my morning Bible readings, the Old Testament focus has been on the book of Exodus. That marvelous story of God's liberation of Jewish slaves from Egypt. Have you ever thought about when the story of the freedom begins? You could say it starts when Moses is met by God at the burning bush. Others might think that it's when Moses first goes off and makes a demand of Pharaoh, let my people go. I think it starts earlier than that. Because right at the end of Exodus 2, we read this. But during that long period, the king of Egypt died, and the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Just think about that and hold on to it. A group of slaves. Or to use that phrase we heard earlier, a bunch of nobodies from nowhere. And they pray and they cry out. The cries go up to God. And something changes. God looks on the Israelites and is concerned. And the game is on. The great liberation begins. So if you're in the depths and in the pit and run out of road and worried for yourself or someone else you know or love, know that things can change. Say a prayer. Even from the depths, bring it all to God. Time is gone, but let me pray for you as I finish. I pray, my friends, a blessing for the coming days for you and those you know and love who find themselves in the depths. That as you pray from that place, you would know the blessing of the God of forgiveness who makes a new beginning possible, the blessing that comes when the darkness of night gives way to the sunlight of morning, the blessing that enables you to hope for the days to come and forevermore. Amen. Amen. Talk to you soon, friends, and until then, God bless.